How would you like to be perfect? In most cases, it's impossible, but in sewing, it can be done. In this video, I'll show you tips and tricks to achieve perfection. Hi, I'm Lisa, and I'm from thetiltedthread.com. I love what I do. I've helped crafting students discover their natural skills and abilities to reach results they never dreamed were possible. I can help you get started on your very own path to success. Let's start now. If you've ever sewn a quilt block and the seams don't line up, or the points are missing from your triangles, or they just don't fit with the next block, you are not alone. Having the pieces cut to the right size, of course, is incredibly important, but having a perfect seam allowance is mandatory. Perfection can be obtained. But first, let's talk about the perfect seam allowance. I'm sure you've heard 1/4 inch, but that's actually not true. If you sew a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, your block will be ever so slightly smaller than intended. Let's think about what happens when we sew two pieces of fabric together. They are ultimately opened in one direction or the other, and sometimes even in two directions. When they are opened, they are then folded. These folds are why the 1/4 inch seam allowance is not perfect. Experienced quilters call for the Scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. This means that it's just a thread or two shy of the 1/4 inch, which allows room for the folded material. So now that we know what the perfect seam allowance is, it's time to figure out how to achieve it. I know what you're thinking. I'll buy a 1/4 inch presser foot. I thought that too and was disappointed. Don't get me wrong, I love presser feet. In fact, I have an entire collection. But the 1/4 inch presser foot helps you make a 1/4 inch seam, not a scant 1/4 inch seam. If at this point you're throwing your hands in the air thinking about giving up, don't. There are solutions. One solution is to use a seam guide. This can be a rubberized product or magnetic strip or even painter's tape. This type of seam guide is awesome. It's raised enough that it provides a little guidance for your fabric, but not so much that it's going to interfere with other sewing tasks. The magnetic strip, I don't use them. Here's my problem with magnetic strip. I have a computerized sewing machine, and having a magnet anything near the computerized section of the sewing machine makes me very nervous. For that reason, I'm even very careful on where I place my magnetic pin tray. Plus, think about magnets on the fridge. You can easily move them. And this is not what you're looking for in this case. That's not what you're looking for in a seam guide. You could use painter's tape. Tape is great. It's easy to apply, easy to remove, leaves no residue. However, it doesn't offer you that lip for your fabric, but you could layer the tape. So that would be a good solution. Now that you've decided how you're going to make your seam guide, let's talk about how to make sure it is accurate. Using a quilting ruler or a seam guide, align the needle to the 1/4 inch marking. Now shift ever so slightly to the right. This will give you the scant seam. Now remember, this only needs to be 1 to 2 threads. Holding your ruler steady, affix your guide, being careful not to extend it into your feed dogs. Now let's go back to talking about presser feet. Many machines allow you to shift your needle one way or the other. Mine sews in the middle or in the left. Your machine may allow you to bump your needle to the side. Please consult your owner's manual. Before you bump your needle or select a position other than the middle, please note 2 things. 1, some presser feet only have a center middle hole. So if you adjust your needle to the side, then it will hit the side of the presser foot and not the center hole as intended. In addition to breaking your needle, throwing shrapnels of metal in the air, you could also seriously damage your machine. There are presser feet with larger holes that easily accommodate needle movement. Think about the presser feet you use to zigzag and the movement that the needle makes then. One last check. Most sewing machines come with an all-purpose needle plate. This needle plate has a hole large enough that it will easily accommodate any needle position. However, a straight stitch needle plate does exist. The straight stitch needle plate has one single tiny hole that is intended for center middle stitching only. So make sure that you have an all-purpose needle plate in before you move your needle position. Now that we know how to sew the perfect seam, let's test it. Cut 3 strips of fabric 1.5 inches wide and sew them together using your new seam guide. My machine has an excellent marking on the throat of the machine for the 1/4 inch, and I know it to be accurate. If I sew so that I can see the line, that gives me my scant seam. To illustrate this point, I am going to sew a little ways from the line. This will give us an even smaller seam allowance, and it will make our pieces not measure properly. Press them open, then measure that middle piece. It should be exactly 1 inch. If it's off, then you'll need to adjust your stitch guide accordingly. Now that I know that I'm going to need to make some adjustments, I'm going back to my machine and use the guideline that I know is accurate. I am simply going to re-sew this piece and then take it back to the ironing board. Set the seams for a quick press, open them up, and measure. You can see that we have now achieved perfection. I know this seems like a lot of work, but it will only take you 10 to 15 minutes. It'll be so totally worth it to achieve perfection.